Imagine waking up one morning and realizing the world you trusted has suddenly collapsed. Banks are closed, paper money feels useless, governments are desperate, fear is everywhere. Now imagine you had one asset that quietly survived while everything else burned. This is not fiction. This actually happened twice during World War I and World War II. And the people who understood gold and silver didn't just survive these wars. They preserved their wealth when millions lost everything. Most history books talk about battles, weapons, and politics. Very few talk about what happened to ordinary investors, what happened to their savings, their cash, their life's work. Today, we're uncovering the hidden financial story of the world wars, how gold and silver became silent lifeboats during humanity's darkest hours. Before we go deeper, if you want more real stories about money, history, and wealth protection that schools never teach, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you think, and it keeps these stories coming. Let's go back to the early 1900s. The world was still on a gold standard. Paper money wasn't just trust, it was a promise backed by real metal. When World War I erupted in 1914, governments suddenly needed massive amounts of money to fund armies, weapons, and supplies. Printing money became the fastest solution. But printing money without gold backing has consequences. As war spread across Europe, people noticed something strange. Prices were rising fast. Savings held in cash were losing purchasing power. But gold coins and silver coins, they didn't lose value. In fact, in many places, they quietly became more valuable with each passing year of war. Governments understood this danger. Some countries banned private gold ownership. Others encouraged citizens to hand over gold for paper currency for the war effort. Many people trusted the government and complied. Others didn't. They hid gold under floorboards, inside walls, or converted savings into silver coins they could easily trade. By the end of World War I, currencies were weakened, economies were damaged, and trust in paper money was shaken. But gold and silver holders had options. They could rebuild, they could move, they could start again. And this pattern was about to repeat on an even larger scale, just a few decades later. This is only the beginning, and what happened during World War II was far more intense, far more controlled, and far more revealing about the true role of gold and silver in times of total chaos. After World War I ended, many people believed the worst was over. Nations tried to rebuild, currencies were redesigned, and paper money returned to daily life. But beneath the surface, the damage was deep. Governments had printed enormous amounts of money during the war, and gold reserves were drained. The trust between money and real value was already broken, even if people didn't fully realize it yet. In countries like Germany, Austria, and parts of Eastern Europe, the situation became extreme. Inflation slowly turned into hyperinflation. Salaries were paid in stacks of cash, yet the cash could barely buy bread. People rushed to markets with wheelbarrows full of paper notes. Meanwhile, those who held gold or silver could still exchange a single coin for weeks of food. The difference was shocking. Gold and silver didn't magically increase in value. Paper money collapsed around them. That's the key lesson many investors learned the hard way. Metals didn't fail, currencies did. As memories of World War I faded, the world walked straight toward another disaster. The Great Depression of the 1930s crushed banks and destroyed confidence. Then, just as economies were struggling to recover, World War II erupted. This time, governments were far more aggressive in controlling money, metals, and people. When World War II began, countries immediately tightened financial rules. Gold ownership became restricted or illegal in several places. Silver coins disappeared from circulation almost overnight. People noticed that governments didn't want citizens holding real money during wartime. That alone sent a powerful message. Smart families adapted quietly. Some converted savings into jewelry, small gold pieces, or foreign silver coins. Others traded goods for metals. In occupied countries, gold and silver became tools of survival. They were used to bribe guards, secure safe passage, or buy food when official money meant nothing. Unlike paper currency, gold and silver crossed borders without losing trust. A gold coin in France was still valuable in Switzerland. A silver coin in Poland could still buy food in rural areas. In a world divided by war, metals spoke a universal language. As bombs fell and cities burned, paper wealth vanished on balance sheets. But real wealth stayed silent, portable, and patient, waiting for the war to end. And when it did, those who held metals were positioned very differently from those who didn't. What happened next reshaped the global financial system forever. And it revealed exactly why governments fear gold during times of crisis. As World War II intensified, the gap between official money and real value became impossible to ignore. Governments issued ration cards, price controls, and strict limits on withdrawals. Banks looked solid from the outside, but inside they were fragile. People could see it in their daily lives. You could have a pocket full of paper money and still go hungry. In Nazi-occupied Europe, currency rules changed constantly. One week, a note was valid, the next week it wasn't. New currencies were introduced, old ones canceled, and exchange limits destroyed savings overnight. But gold and silver didn't care who was in power. They didn't need official approval. They were accepted quietly, person to person, without paperwork. In France, families used silver coins to buy food from farmers outside the cities. In Italy, gold jewelry was traded for safe shelter. In Eastern Europe, small gold pieces were stitched into clothing so families could flee when borders shifted. These metals weren't investments anymore. They were insurance for life itself. Meanwhile, in the United States, the story looked different but led to the same conclusion. Gold ownership had already been restricted in the 1930s. Citizens were forced to sell gold to the government at fixed prices. Officially, this was done to stabilize the economy. Unofficially, it transferred real wealth from people to the state. During the war, the US dollar gained power globally, but it was still backed by gold held by the government, not the public. Silver played a critical role as well. Silver coins were removed from circulation and redirected for industrial use in weapons, electronics, and military equipment. Once again, real assets were pulled away quietly. Those who understood what was happening didn't panic. They adapted. Some held foreign gold, some stored silver outside the banking system, and others invested in assets directly connected to metals. They knew one thing for sure. Paper promises were temporary, but physical value endured. When soldiers returned home and the war finally ended, a new financial world emerged. Borders changed, currencies were reset, and wealth was redistributed. For most people, the reset meant starting from zero. For gold and silver holders, it meant survival with options. And the most important lesson was becoming clear. Wars don't destroy wealth equally. They expose what wealth truly is. After World War II ended, the physical destruction was obvious, but the financial damage ran even deeper. Entire cities were gone, industries were broken, and national debts were massive. Governments needed a way to rebuild trust in money while keeping control. That's when a new system was introduced, one that quietly placed gold at the center again, without giving ordinary people direct access to it. Under the new global arrangement, currencies were tied to the US dollar, and the dollar itself was linked to gold. On paper, this looked stable. In reality, gold was locked away in vaults, controlled by governments and central banks. The public was told to trust paper money once more. Many did, because after years of war, people wanted normal life back. But the war had changed behavior forever. Those who had lived through occupation, rationing, and currency collapses never forgot the lesson. In Europe and Asia, families passed down stories of hidden coins and traded jewelry. Gold wasn't discussed openly, but it was respected quietly. Silver, meanwhile, became the everyday metal of recovery. In local markets, small silver items were easy to exchange. They didn't attract attention, and they didn't require large sums. Silver helped rebuild trade at the ground level, while gold protected larger savings. In countries where currencies were replaced overnight, gold and silver acted as bridges. They moved value from the old system to the new one. A person with metals could adapt. A person with only paper had to accept whatever terms the government offered. In the United States, returning soldiers found a booming economy, but even there, metals played a silent role. Industrial demand for silver exploded. Gold remained untouchable for citizens, yet its presence supported global confidence in the dollar. Once again, real money worked behind the scenes while paper took the spotlight. By the late 1940s and early 1950s, the world believed it had learned how to prevent financial chaos. Growth was strong, currencies were stable, and gold seemed like a relic of the past. But history has a habit of repeating itself. The people who remembered the wars didn't forget what saved them. They held on to one simple truth. Systems change, governments change, but gold and silver survived the transition. That truth would become even more important in the decades that followed, as the world slowly moved away from gold once again, setting the stage for future crises. As the decades passed after World War II, memories of hardship slowly faded for many people. New generations grew up trusting banks, pensions, and paper investments. Gold and silver were pushed to the background, often described as old-fashioned or unnecessary. But those who had lived through war never fully let go. They watched carefully as governments changed the rules again. By the 1960s and early 1970s, the pressure on the global financial system was building. Governments were spending heavily, printing more money, and relying on confidence rather than discipline. Gold reserves were being drained quietly. Then, in a single moment, the link between paper money and gold was broken. For the first time in modern history, money was no longer tied to anything real. It was backed only by trust. For people who remembered the world wars, this felt familiar. They had seen what happens when trust breaks under pressure. Gold and silver responded instantly. Prices rose, not because metals changed, but because paper lost its anchor. Those who had kept even small amounts of gold or silver through the post-war years saw their purchasing power protected once again. This moment proved something important. Gold and silver were not just wartime tools. They were protection against long-term policy mistakes. Wars accelerate financial collapse, but bad money decisions can do the same, just more slowly. The World Wars taught investors how fast systems can change. One day, everything looks normal. The next day, withdrawals are limited, currencies are replaced, and savings are trapped. Gold and silver gave people mobility, privacy, and independence when those things mattered most. This is why central banks still hold gold today. Not for decoration, not for nostalgia. They hold it because when confidence disappears, gold remains. The lesson from World War I and World War II is simple but uncomfortable. Wealth is not what you see on a screen. It's what survives when rules are rewritten. And as we move closer to modern times, these historical lessons become more relevant, not less, because the tools that protected wealth during the world wars still exist, and the conditions that made them necessary are quietly returning. When you study the behavior of ordinary people during the world wars, one pattern stands out clearly. The smartest decisions were rarely loud or dramatic. They were quiet, patient, and often invisible. People didn't talk openly about gold or silver. They acted privately, understanding that survival often depended on discretion. During World War II, black markets existed everywhere, even where governments denied it. Official money followed official rules, but real life followed different ones. Farmers accepted silver instead of paper. Shopkeepers preferred small gold items over currency that could be canceled tomorrow. Trust shifted from institutions to tangible value. In war-torn cities, silver played a crucial role because it was divisible. A single silver coin could buy bread, milk, or fuel. Gold was too valuable for daily use, but perfect for escape, bribery, or starting over in a new place. Together, gold and silver formed a complete survival system. In refugee stories, this pattern repeats again and again. Families who carried even a few coins had options. They could cross borders, negotiate, or wait out chaos. Families who relied only on bank accounts were trapped by paperwork, rules, and frozen systems. Meanwhile, governments learned their own lessons. After the wars, financial controls became more sophisticated. Capital movement was monitored. Ownership rules tightened. This wasn't accidental. History had shown that people with real money were harder to control. Yet despite restrictions, gold and silver never disappeared. They moved underground, into private hands, passed quietly between generations. Not as speculation, but as security. Even in peaceful times, this mindset stayed alive. Investors who understood war history didn't see metals as something to trade quickly. They saw them as something to hold patiently, something you hope you never need, but are grateful to have when everything else fails. This perspective separates speculation from protection. Stocks can grow wealth, businesses can create income, but gold and silver protect purchasing power when growth becomes impossible. World wars don't announce themselves clearly. They begin with tension, debt, and political stress. Financial stress comes first. The people who recognized those early signs in the past were the ones who stayed calm when chaos arrived. And that calm wasn't luck. It was preparation grounded in history. By the time the world recovered from World War II, it was clear that gold and silver were more than just metals. They were trust in physical form. Banks, governments, and currencies could fail, but these metals carried value across borders, cultures, and crises. That lesson was not lost on families who had lived through occupations, or rationing, and displacement. They had seen firsthand that paper promises were temporary, while real assets endured. During the post-war rebuilding era, Europe and Asia faced severe shortages. Inflation returned in pockets. Some governments printed money to fund reconstruction. Cities like Berlin, Vienna, and Warsaw were literally starting from rubble. In these situations, ordinary citizens relied on metals quietly. A small gold coin could secure essentials. A few silver coins could be traded for food or fuel. It wasn't wealth building, it was survival. Meanwhile, the United States and other stable nations seemed insulated from these challenges. But even there, gold and silver quietly influenced the economy. Industrial demand for silver skyrocketed, powering new electronics, weapons, and infrastructure. Gold reserves backed global currencies indirectly, keeping systems afloat even when public ownership was restricted. People didn't notice it daily, but the effects were everywhere. For savvy investors, the lesson was clear. Metals weren't about speculation. They were about protection. Those who had held small quantities of gold or silver throughout the war didn't just survive financially, they had the flexibility to act. They could invest, relocate, or rebuild without being entirely dependent on banks or governments. This mindset passed quietly from generation to generation. Families taught children to value something tangible. Stories of coins hidden in walls, silver bars buried in gardens, and gold jewelry exchanged for necessities became part of family lore. These were practical lessons, not theoretical ones. Even as the world entered decades of peace and prosperity, the shadow of war lingered in the lessons learned. Economies could collapse almost overnight, as they had during World War I and II. But metals endured. They didn't promise growth or high returns, they promised preservation, a way to maintain purchasing power no matter what. And that preservation mindset is why gold and silver remain central to wealth strategies today. Not flashy, not trendy, but reliable. The world could change overnight, but metals remembered history, and history rewarded those who remembered metals. As the world moved into the 1960s and 1970s, the lessons from the world wars became even more relevant. People saw economic growth, booming cities, and expanding industries, but underneath, pressures were quietly building. Governments were spending heavily, debts were rising, and currencies were increasingly untethered from reality. Those who remembered wartime survival instinctively understood the risk. History could repeat itself in a new form. The pivotal moment came in 1971 when the United States officially ended the gold standard. For decades, the dollar had been backed by gold reserves, providing a sense of stability. Suddenly, paper money was no longer tied to anything physical. On the surface, it seemed like a modern financial solution. Behind the scenes, it was a reminder that governments can change rules overnight, just like in wartime. Gold and silver immediately became symbols of security again. Investors realized that tangible assets didn't need official permission or guarantees. A gold coin held the same value whether governments imposed restrictions or not. Silver, more accessible and divisible, became a practical tool for small-scale preservation. History had taught one lesson clearly: wars, crises, or government decisions rarely destroy real value. They destroy trust in paper, systems, and promises. Metals don't escape value, they escape control. Those who had studied the world wars understood this instinctively. They diversified into physical gold and silver quietly, often before crises hit headlines. Meanwhile, new generations who hadn't experienced war firsthand often ignored these lessons. They trusted banks, digital numbers, and government promises. But the stories from the 20th century never disappeared. They lingered in family memories, in private vaults, and in conversations between those who understood the invisible lessons of history. Even today, when political instability, economic stress, or global uncertainty appears, the same pattern repeats. Paper wealth is vulnerable. Real physical assets endure. Gold and silver are not speculative luxuries. They are tools for protection, learned through blood, sacrifice, and experience. Understanding this mindset is key for any modern investor. Wars may feel distant, but the principles remain. Systems can fail. Trust can be broken. But tangible assets, carefully preserved, quietly held, survive. That insight connects the world wars directly to modern wealth strategies, showing that history isn't just something to study. It's a guide for survival. By the late 20th century, gold and silver had proven themselves over and over again. Wars, depressions, hyperinflation, and sudden policy changes had shown that paper money can vanish, but metals endure. Investors who had studied the 20th century understood something most people didn't. Wealth is not just about growth, it's about survival and flexibility. The world wars had drilled that lesson into anyone paying attention. During World War I and II, people discovered firsthand that holding metals gave options that banks or governments couldn't provide. A gold coin could secure passage across borders. Silver could feed a family or buy essential goods when paper was worthless. These metals were portable, trusted, and universally accepted. They didn't depend on any system, license, or government promise. And after the wars, the value of those assets wasn't erased. It remained real, tangible, and usable. Even in the modern financial system, the echoes of that era remain. Central banks hold gold because they know the truth that ordinary citizens experience during global conflict. Tangible wealth survives systemic shocks. Gold and silver don't just preserve value in war, they preserve purchasing power in times of uncertainty, policy mistakes, or economic disruption. That's why savvy investors continue to keep at least a portion of their wealth in these metals. The lesson is timeless. You don't need a crisis to prepare. You need perspective. The people who understood gold and silver in the early 20th century were not necessarily richer than their neighbors in booming times. But when war struck, when currencies collapsed, and when economies were forced to reset, they were the ones who still had options. They could survive, move, and rebuild while others started from scratch. History is more than dates, treaties, and battles. It's a roadmap of human behavior under stress. And one thing history repeatedly shows is that real wealth is durable. It's tangible, it's portable, and it's resistant to fear, chaos, and human error. By learning from the world wars, modern investors can see beyond the daily fluctuations of markets and understand what truly preserves value when uncertainty strikes. The next and final part will connect these lessons directly to today, showing why gold and silver are still essential for anyone who wants financial security, no matter the economic environment. Today, more than 70 years after World War II, the lessons of gold and silver remain as relevant as ever. Modern economies are more complex, markets move faster, and digital money dominates our lives. Yet the principles haven't changed. Paper can lose value, governments can change rules overnight, and financial systems can fail. Gold and silver remain silent protectors, tangible, portable, and universally trusted. Investors who understand history don't see metals as just a speculative asset. They see insurance against uncertainty, a way to preserve purchasing power, and a hedge against chaos. The people who survived World War I and II didn't become wealthy because they predicted battles or won investments. They survived because they held something real when everything else collapsed. That simple strategy ensured options, flexibility, and security when it mattered most. Even now, in today's interconnected world, these lessons apply. Political unrest, currency devaluation, global debt crises, or unexpected shocks can change financial realities almost overnight. Those who hold gold and silver today are simply applying the same survival principles learned decades ago. They understand that while stocks and bonds can grow wealth, metals protect it when systems are stressed. If there's one takeaway from history, it's this: tangible assets endure, paper can fail, and preparation is priceless. By holding gold and silver, you aren't speculating. You are preserving freedom and choice. Every crisis in history has proven the same pattern. Systems may fail, but real value survives. Now, I want to hear from you. Which story surprised you the most? The way gold quietly protected families, or how silver kept ordinary people fed during crises? Comment below your thoughts and share this video with friends or family who need to see the hidden lessons of history. Hit that like button if you found these insights valuable, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal how money, metals, and history connect. Remember, gold and silver aren't just relics of the past. They are keys to understanding wealth, protection, and survival in any era. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it always teaches. And the smartest investors are the ones who listen,